Hey, church family, welcome to another Q&A with Pastor Randy Roberts. And today we're actually grateful that we were going to be joined by another individual that I'll introduce to you here in a moment. But I just want to share with you a few things as we kind of begin this Q&A. Several items. Would you please consider partnering with us in just sharing this Q&A experience? And so if you click that share button, or if you're watching on Roku or another application, would you consider logging on and just sharing that URL to a friend or family member? If you're on Facebook, would you consider pushing that share button? But the second thing, we'd love to know where you're watching from. So if you could just tell us for a moment, put your name in there and tell us where you're watching from, and maybe even a message that you would like to share with others who are watching and that might be interested by your encouraging word. And so tell us where you're from. We always have the very interesting countries of individuals who are partnering with us in ministry. And so we would love to hear where you're coming from. Right now, I want to just introduce to you our guest besides Pastor Randy Roberts. Her name is Jamie Stadola. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist who runs a practice out of Orange County, but she's also a church member of ours. And so I'd like to welcome both of these of our friends on our Q&A right now. So Jamie, welcome, and Pastor Randy, welcome.
Thank you.
So guys, tell me, where are you both right now at this very moment?
Jamie, where are you?
I am in Pound, Wisconsin.
Pound, Wisconsin. Yes. Is that up in the panhandle of Texas? I'm trying to picture where that is.
Nowhere near. Pound, Wisconsin, Pound, a whole 16 ounces in weight, and about population of approximately 300-ish.
300?
Yes.
Really?
Very small town. And it's a lovely, rainy spring, summer day here.
Wow. 300, Philip. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
That's like how many you have over to your house on a regular basis.
Oh, my goodness. Hey, I've never really been to Wisconsin besides when I went to Oshkosh.
Yes.
That was it's a beautiful state. My goodness.
It is beautiful.
It's really pretty.
It really is. Where are you in relationship to Oshkosh, Jamie?
It's probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours. Pound, Wisconsin is approximately 60 miles north of Green Bay.
Oh, okay.
And Oshkosh is just south of Green Bay.
Okay.
Very good. I've heard they have a football team there, I think, don't they?
I think there might be. There might be a Dallas team that has visited a time or two.
Oh, mercy. We go there to die.
And freeze.
Freeze, that's true.
Hey, now, Randy, where are you located?
I'm in Redlands, Philip, just
Redlands,
at home.
California.
I'm here in my study/exercise room. You can see I don't know what it's called back there, but it's the thing that I die on regularly. Some kind of machine.
You die daily.
That's right.
Amen. What a biblical joke. I like that. I would ask you if you ever use that thing.
I do. I absolutely. I didn't get to this week, which was a disappointment, but next week, yeah, I definitely will be.
Yeah, it showed on that Zoom staff meeting. I could tell.
I need to use it more.
Oh, man. Well, hey, both of you, thank you so much. I know our viewers are eager to hear from you. Before we get to any questions and answers, just want to share with both of you some greetings from people around the world. We've got Al from El Sobrante, California.
Very good.
Bill is watching from Loma Linda, traveling in Orland, California. That's awesome.
Very good.
Tara Johnson, happy Sabbath from Redlands.
From Redlands, right here at home.
Yep. Henry Miller, would love it, brother. You're watching. I forgot.
Shabbat Shalom.
How did he say how to say?
Wasn't it Toswell or something like that?
That's right.
Yes, Henry's a few of these I'm seeing are regulars now that I've been here a couple times.
Sonia from Portland watching. Welcome. Gina, Greg and Gina from Polson, Montana.
That's beautiful country there.
Yeah.
Good to hear from you
Beautiful
guys.
country.
And we've got some people from Minnesota. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us this afternoon or morning or evening, wherever you're from.
Bemidji, Minnesota, home of Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox. Wow. Very
Ooh,
good.
we have Hershey, Pennsylvania. I could go for some Hershey's.
Absolutely. Sweetest place on earth. And then how about Malaga, Spain?
Oh my goodness.
We've just had a family join our pastoral staff, Harib, who are from Spain. Francisco Burgos and Adriana Pereira. So good to have you from Spain.
Oh, Keith from Port Townsend, Washington. Oh my, I love that little town. Oh, that's a
Do you?
yeah. I used to pastor at a church in Burlington, Washington, which was
Keith Buchanan. Man, that goes back way back into the day. Keith used to be a member here at our church, and he would bring Clifton Davis. You ever heard of Clifton Davis, either of you?
Nope.
He was a pastor. He was also a Hollywood actor.
Oh,
You could watch him at church in the morning and watch him on Saturday night on NBC. So
wow.
Keith was a good friend of his.
I see a friend on here of mine that I used to attend church with in New York City.
Oh, beautiful.
It says Joe. Joe.
Awesome. Hey, and now many of people don't know this, but Jamie and I knew each other from way back at Andrews University.
Is that a fact?
Yes.
Wow.
Days.
So what was Philip like back then, Jamie?
A little mischievous.
Jamie, don't say anymore.
Not Philip.
Well, guys, thank you so much. Appreciate both of you. Let's jump right into the Q&A then. I'll stop Jamie from sharing any other news about me. Tell me, both of you, let's just start off with kind of basing some questions from Randy's sermon and the idea of conversation, how to have healthy conversation, how to grow as a conversationalist. What are some powerful conversations that have spoken to you personally that come from Scripture that you've encountered? Conversations in particular. I think of the one myself from Eden, Adam and Eve, and their conversation with God after the fall, and the shame they felt. But anything in particular from you two? Just I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Jamie, any conversation from Scripture that jumps out at you?
A couple, yes, that jump out right away. One is negotiating the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah.
Abraham and God.
And God kept listening, and he kept asking. Very patient and shows a loving, willing God. As well, then, not necessarily, the next one is not necessarily God, but in Job chapter 2, verse 11, I just was reading that one before we started, and it just touched me because some of the work we've been doing recently is about grief and loss. And that one is where his friends are going to meet him, greet him, and basically grieve with him. So if you've not read that one recently, Job chapter 2, starting in verse 11. It's beautiful.
Wow, that's really good. Phil, a couple of them that jump out to me are almost right next to each other. And they're in the Gospel of John, chapters 3 and 4, where you have this interesting conversation unfolding between Jesus and, on the one hand, Nicodemus, and on the other hand, the woman at the well. And you think they're connecting, but then there's some element of that conversation where Jesus is saying some things where I can almost picture them saying, wait a minute, I'm not sure I understand what you just said. And then it's like, oh, and then they do understand, and just powerful conversations. He seems to kind of follow their lead a little bit, where they're taking it, but then he says things that suddenly take it in a whole different direction. He's non-shaming, but truth-telling.
Yeah.
I love those two conversations.
Wow. Hey, if you're watching and you're a viewer today, we'd love to hear from you. What are some of the most powerful conversations that have impacted your life? And so would you just kind of comment those on the side there? We've got another conversational question that's come in. I would like to ask
Philip, before you go, we can't let Bill Omar's statement go unchecked, because that's just terrible. Do you see what he said? Doug Mace, the one person in the church that doesn't age. He's calling us out.
He's a Mace.
So you were saying, Philip?
Yeah, you derailed me. Now I'm forgetting.
I did.
No, I remember. What are several conversations that you wish, kind of thinking about our global church, potentially from this current moment in our church to our overall kind of Adventist or even just Christian church in general? I'll give you the openness to speak to either one, but what are some conversations you wish would happen in our churches, in maybe the Loma Linda University Church, or just in a general sense, even in our denomination? What are some conversations you wish could take place, even challenging ones that you're skeptical you'd like to have, but think are necessary?
Wow, that's a good question, Philip. Jamie, do you want to weigh into that first?
Wow.
Randy, you're throwing her under the bus.
Well, no. Okay, I'll throw one out that I think we need to have, and that's the conversation about race. I think that right now is a very hot topic, and I say that kind of with a double entendre. It's a hot topic in the sense that there's a lot of fire, a lot of eruptions, a lot of difference, a lot of passionate feelings about it. I say it also, it's a hot topic in the sense that it's germane. Everybody's talking about it. But I think that's a really important conversation for us to have, so that, and especially so that people of color feel heard, that they feel that whatever it is that they are experiencing, the things for which they're experiencing pain, sorrow, grief, are validated, legitimated, and we can get to a place where we can talk more fully and freely as brothers and sisters in Christ. So I think that's one really important conversation.
Now, when you think of that conversation, are there any particularities of the conversation that you think should take place? Anything in particular when we discuss race in the church? What are some of those maybe you're thinking of?
Well, I think if we're talking about having that conversation specifically in the church, if we can all start from one central presupposition, and if we can all continue to adhere to that, it would be this: underneath it all, we are bound together by the cross of Calvary, and Jesus, according to Ephesians 2, has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, and he's made the two one. So if we can come at it from that perspective, we have been made one in Christ, then we are much more free to be open, frank, tell the truth, because we know we're bound together. And there's something deeper that binds us together than that which separates us. So for me, that would be the unique contribution the church makes to that conversation.
That's great. That is great. I love that point. I last evening I shared a sermon. I Still Have a Dream. People can watch it if they like, but I read the prayer that was ushered in at the Let It Roll conference that the North American division did, that all of us pastors got a text of that prayer. And if you haven't read that prayer, I would encourage those of you maybe to go watch that sermon or find it on the North American Division website. But it was a powerful prayer on race and reconciliation. That was a big one.
Yeah, I see. Actually, Grace commented about she had watched you last night. And
said,
yeah.
Where would people find that, Philip, if they wanted to watch that? Would it be on our website?
That's on our Loma Linda University Church YouTube channel. You just click videos and the home church sermon. It's a red kind of symbol.
Okay.
And the title, I Still Have a Dream, kind of playing off of Martin Luther King's.
Right.
Yeah. So Jamie, interested to hear what you might have to say. What kind of conversations do you think the church as a whole should potentially have?
Well, the ones that stand out still do have to do with inequality. First and foremost, of course, race, and essentially just the fact that to God there is no race. We are all a part of His colorful rainbow. He created us all like that, in all different colors and shades. But going a bit further to some other challenging topics that have come up even in the last several years is, gender, or even just the topic of homosexuality and how to manage that. Sometimes, just from different home churches, for example, there may be issues regarding those two topics in particular churches where people don't know how to have those conversations. And so I think those are kind of the three trifecta that stand out.
Yeah, that's really good. I also see one of our viewers is talking about the abuse that's happened between pastors and children. That's a big conversation. That's a heavy one.
Mm-hmm.
That's a heavy one. Now my daughter walked into the room back here.
She playing the guitar back there? Is that who
playing the guitar? That was her. I had a 1.5-year-old. Yeah.
I see. Sorry, somebody else had also said about essentially abuse, talking about relationships with parents and abuse taking place. I think it scrolled up somewhere. How have children relationships changed due to social isolation? That's the really sad part about the long-lasting, devastating effects of this isolation that we're all in. Is unfortunately a lot of children are now subject to parents with a lot less patience or a lot more time, where and not even parents, of course, other caretakers or other abusive people in their way.
If I can be kind of just a little bit dark in a moment, but I was just listening to a news report by NPR, or was it a BBC News, and they were saying, coming out of some of the Southeast Asian countries in the dark web, they're seeing a lot more child pornography during these isolation months coming out. And the stark, just devastating thing for me was to realize that many of them are actually parents who are the perpetrators of selling out their children in that way. Those are really tough.
It's inconceivable.
Yeah.
So a lot of conversations that
should be had,
worth having.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what I admire about both of you, just being willing to state both of those, from the abuse to the race. Thank you for your comments on that. Now, both of you are both licensed marriage and family therapists. Some people don't know, Randy, that you are. I want to just share with our viewers, he's not only a senior pastor and a teacher, but he's also a counselor. And Jamie runs a very reputable practice in Orange County in marriage and family therapy, and just therapy in general. And you both have encountered all kinds of individuals over these years. I'm wondering, what might be some painful communication pitfalls that you've observed in counseling sessions that you think could have easily been solved if, and you can kind of complete the sentence.
Well, I'll throw this out there. Scott Stanley and Howard Markman from University of Denver have done a lot of work, a lot of research on what makes marriage work, what causes marital breakdown, and so forth. And they talk about 4 conflict styles that are so damaging that if a couple is engaging in them, they are headed to marital disruption and difficulty, and they could be headed toward divorce. And there is another gentleman, researcher, marriage, family therapist, etc., up in the Northwest, named John Gottman, who has some rather similar kind of work. Also has come to 4 styles that are very damaging. In fact, Gottman's, give you an idea of how deadly he feels they are, he calls his the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So, not a good thing. So I think of those, and for Markman and Stanley, those are escalation, invalidation, negative interpretations, and withdrawal and avoidance. So I suppose anybody who's done counseling over not even that long a period of time has seen people engaging in each one of those. So those are some pretty sadly common pitfalls and damaging ones as well.
Can you slow down with those? You just named them off so fast. Those are gold. Let's go through that. So a communication pitfall that someone might be experiencing. You said one is escalation. What does that look like?
Well, Jamie, you've seen escalation, I'm sure, in counseling. I'll throw this out. I don't think they're talking about escalation of emotions, because anytime you get upset, your emotions, tend to escalate some. I think they're talking about escalation of content and the kinds of things that we can say to each other, really damaging things. Would you agree with that, Jamie? Is that what you would understand the escalation to be?
Actually, I would say both. And the reason I say both is because some of the work that I've done in terms of information that I use from Gottman is that they actually use, and I have as well in my office, pulse oximeters. Because what they're doing when they're escalating like that, the couple or a person, is that they're essentially being flooded. So they're not able to hear, they're not able to listen to what's going on because their brain is being flooded. And you can measure that. Actually, this is an oximeter. You put it on your finger and it measures the oxygen.
Oh my goodness, look at that.
And your heart rate. And so you can set it so that you're able to either see a little light or a little beep if it's going too high. And so basically the person is not really able to get anything done because they're now flooded. Their mind is now flooded.
That's very helpful, Jamie. Now, do you have couples, for example, actually wear that during exchanges?
Yes,
very good.
I have. And I'll work with them and just say, okay, how are you feeling? And then once it starts beeping, then we'll talk about how they're feeling. Typically, it does take quite a while for somebody to calm down. I would say probably minimum approximately 30 minutes. So if the person's heart rate and their flooding has really taken them over, we might not actually get that much more done depending upon how well they've been able to learn to regulate.
That's very good.
Wow. Now, Randy, what was the second, third, and fourth that you mentioned?
Invalidation.
Okay.
The subtitle that Markman and Stanley give to that is painful put downs. And, it can be, I suppose, a range of things from name calling to just damaging statements, personal attacks, those kinds of things. It leads to, it's just very disrespectful, very hurtful, very personal. The third one, negative interpretations. Others call that mind reading, rather than just taking somebody at their word for what they're saying and trusting that, putting words in their mouth, as it were. And the last is withdrawal and avoidance. I don't want to talk about this, or there's not a problem here, or they just won't engage.
Yeah. My favorite one is the third one. I like that one in conflict.
Your favorite one?
Oh man. Well, Jamie, tell us a little bit from your end. You've done so much, so many hours and thousands of hours of counseling sessions. Would love to hear from you. What do you think are some pitfalls in conversations?
In some ways, I was going to kind of go where Randy went, especially with these different areas and especially the 4 apocalypse. I think that some of the things that I see often coming in when I'm sitting with couples, or sometimes I end up getting a couple, but one of the partners contacts me first, and then I realize later, oh, they actually want to do couples therapy. And the reason that one person has contacted me or come to see me first is because they kind of want to have a hold on what's going to go on. Mm-hmm. And so I usually experience those to be males more often than not. And they usually tend, from my experience thus far, to be males that are very insecure. There's a lot of ego going on there. There may be a couple of diagnoses we could label them as with what they're presenting. But basically, it's not my fault. If she would just change this, or he, if there's a case as well, if they would just change that part. So I want you to hear all my side. Oh, but they'll tell you, oh, I do. Of course, I have my downfalls too, and I'm working on those, and I'll work on them. And it's just like, an outpouring of a lot of words and a lot of argument of why it's the other person's fault. And I really see that as a lot of pride, a lot of ego, and the person making a lot of assumptions.
Wow. Well, what do you think then, if you're a viewer and you're wondering, hey, I'd like to ask a question based on the sermon today, we'd love to hear from you. And so we're going to open up conversational questions now from viewers. If you are watching and you have a question on communication, whether it be in family, relationships, in any area, and how the Bible interacts with that, we'd love to answer some of those from you. So would you start sending those in at this moment? There's one that I wanted to share with you here, another question. And this one deals when we're having high stakes conversations. These are moments when there's a lot on the line. It could be in a romantic relationship. It could be in a boss, an employee, a family, just friendship in general. I would love to hear from both of you in this way. When you're in a high stakes conversation, what do you think are some keys to ensure that these serious conversations are as successful as possible?
Jamie, I'll throw that out to you.
Sure. Okay. So I really liked that you actually had a tile this morning, because definitely we've heard of somebody having like the talking stick or an object when they're talking. But I really liked that you legitimately had a piece of the floor. So I would say that people, if they're planning to go to someone, or as a family or a group or a couple, are needing to have a conversation, that they really both go to the conversation first and foremost, being able to be humble. And in order to be humble, I think that it's very important to be able to listen to God. So if you don't have the practice of being able to hear God speaking to you or directing you, then I think you're going to have a hard time in communication, trying to work something out in a high stakes conversation. And a lot of that has to do actually with self-awareness. So if we're not self-aware, I don't know, I will not be able to tell what I'm feeling and what's going on inside of me and how to manage that. Because if I can't do that for myself, it's more likely I'm not going to be able to do that for you, or just vice versa. We have to have both of those components, that ability to see how you're feeling and, have that empathy. But one of the things I walk my clients through often in session is something called Imago Dialogue. This is Dr. Hendricks and Dr. Hendricks, I forget the last name. Actually a husband and wife. And so Imago Dialogue is kind of 3 parts. The first part is mirroring, which is very similar to somebody having the floor, like Randy was talking about in his sermon. So that person has the floor, and the listener needs to be able to respond back and mirror exactly what the person has just said. And I often have to help people recognize that the point of this is not because you agree. The point of this is because you understand. And that's, I think, where people's ego and pride start to get in, because if they start listening enough to understand, they might actually start to agree. It's possible they might start to agree. So they're afraid that somebody's going to come in that bubble. So they go back and forth, and they say, they mirror what has just been said. And then the person that was talking will say, well, is there more? Or they will correct the person. So that's while that person has the tile. And then the person that's listening, the second part is that they're going to provide empathy. And empathy is so important, because empathy is what we create, and we have the ability to do that in our frontal lobe. That is what we use in order to communicate with God and the Holy Spirit. And so if we are not able to hear God, if we're not able to connect with him, then it's going to be harder to have empathy for others. So that might look like, I can imagine you might feel like, and then say what they might be feeling. And you would gauge off of the words that they've been saying. And of course, your ability to empathize. And then also you would be validating what that makes sense because of XYZ, or I understand this part of it. And so I often walk my clients through that. And a lot of times they have breakthroughs while in session. It helps to slow down the trigger topic, and it helps to model what they can take home. So again, that's mirroring, validating, and empathizing.
Excellent.
Very good. That's like that.
Yeah. Hey, now tell us, some parents are watching, some individuals might be working with this age group. What do you do with young adults when they might be, one of our viewers is asking the question, might be in kind of that know-it-all space. You're trying to talk to them like, I know, fine, whatever, and it's just this kind of communication style that can be really frustrating for some parents. One question coming here: how do you communicate with a know-it-all young adult?
Ooh, well, Randy is a parent.
I send him to talk to the young adult pastor.
I know, right? He for sure has a 1.5-year-old. There's a lot of know-it-all coming from that.
That's right. That's a good question, though, Jamie. How would you address that?
I wonder if a young adult who has the know-it-all attitude is actually having a hard time feeling like they're being heard. Because, it just kind of ends the whole conversation. And maybe that's kind of a projection or reflection of the fact that perhaps the parent really isn't giving an environment for them to be heard. Or maybe is giving too much advice, or, you should or shouldn't do this or that, rather than really hearing out the young adult.
That's what I kind of thought initially too. Stephen Covey says, seek first to understand before you're understood. And I wonder in those parenting relationship moments, because I wasn't too far away from that space, maybe 20 years ago. I guess it's getting far now. Okay. But, feeling as though at times, mom and dad just don't understand me. And so I wonder if having that invitation, hey, tell me, work with me. I want to get where you're coming from. Why are you not wanting to take any of mom and dad's advice? Why are you just, I don't know. That's one thought that came to my mind. Randy, what do you got for us?
Well, that's a tough one, because you certainly want your young adult, if they're your own kids or even kids in your church, you want them to be heard. You want to be able to give them a sense that their opinions matter, that they count, that they're valued. So you need to do a lot of listening. On the other hand, I don't think you necessarily want to give away all right to say anything. But you have to do it with some care, because at that stage in life, people are sorting their way through what their life is going to be, what they believe, their understandings of God, the world, all the rest. So while you can speak wisdom into younger persons' lives, you really have to have their permission to be able to do that. There comes a point, even as a parent, that to continue to talk to them in a way that is instructive or directive is going to be counterproductive. And you're just going to get a deaf ear and a palm in your face. I don't want to hear that. And so you really have to do a lot of listening if you're going to connect with them at all. Build a bridge. Once you have that permission to speak into their life, then choose carefully what you're going to speak to. There are some issues that you just have to decide, I'm going to let that go. That's I see that differently. I feel differently about that. But that's, if I'm going to speak something into this person's life, it needs to be something of greater importance than that particular issue. So I think a lot of listening, a lot of getting permission, and then being careful to speak wisely on the major issues, the major matters. I mean, I don't have any great wisdom there, but that's kind of what I've tried.
And I have something to add to that. I'm wondering if the young adult who's saying, he has the attitude or is saying, I know it all, is actually getting that from their parent. So either the parent, even at a young age, might have, the child might have asked the question and the answer might have been, well, because I know it all, or something similar. And so, or even now, the parent, as parenting a young adult, may not be saying that, but may have, or maybe still is modeling that. So what are you modeling now for young children or young adults? Are you modeling the ability to have conversation and actually to allow each other to be heard rather than just talking at?
And let's go to another question. How do you, this is from Sue, she's asking, how do you address power imbalance in communication?
That's a really good question. I assume that what she's asking is, if I'm a person of less power in a relationship and I need to address something, particularly something delicate, to a person of greater power, how do I do that? I'm guessing that's what she's asking. I think the answer is very carefully. No, that's a difficult, in all honesty, that's a difficult situation to find oneself in. I think what Jamie said a little bit earlier comes into play here, and that is the approach of humility, praying and asking God for a humble heart as you come into that situation in that context, but then also not only asking for humility, but asking for courage. Because the truth is, a lot of us can figure out pretty quickly the things that need to be said in a situation like this until we're in the situation. And then when we're in the situation, then all of our conviction and commitment to saying it kind of dissolves. So not only having clarity about what it is, but then having courage to follow through and to say it with humility and grace. Yeah, that's not an easy situation to be in. But the Spirit of God can empower us there.
And I kind of wonder, Randy, if part of this question is actually leaning toward some of the power and control that you begin to see in the cycle of violence, or eventually violence or other types of abuse that go on in relationships, marital relationships. So that's definitely one that would need, if the partner is not able or willing to attend therapy, then most definitely as that person's partner, I would encourage you to seek support, seek some therapeutic support, because you would not want that power imbalance to continue, because it is very damaging to yourself and one day could turn into violence.
Would you both say that it's possible that just stating that out loud to the spouse that is potentially the more dominant one would be a good way to begin a conversation about the issue, if they are not necessarily a violent person, but just maybe verbally just very dominant. Is it okay to just, hey, I feel like I am the lesser one, that you're not really hearing me, you're always speaking over me? I mean, how would you begin that process, besides necessarily saying, hey, counseling would be good, getting that assistance, but is there anything someone could do on their own if the person is at least willing to have a dialogue? Or what do you think?
What would you say to that, Jamie?
So I think I'm understanding that this couple, where the cycle of violence is not cycling, and it's pretty safe. And this is not even a marital situation necessarily. I think that if you have the ability to be transparent and and be vulnerable to let the person know, hey, I feel there's a power imbalance, and I just want to talk to you about something. I want to be on the same level with you in this conversation. And you're doing it knowing that you as much want to listen to that person and are asking for God's guidance and Holy Spirit to guide, then yeah, most definitely transparent conversations that could really, if you're going with a very tender heart to that person, that could be a really good lesson teaching moment for that person to say, oh, how do I come across to my spouse or to my colleagues or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So much has to do with attitude, and Jamie's talking about having a humble heart and having an approach that is non-judgmental, non-threatening, and just owns where you are with your feelings and so forth. There's something disarming about that for most people. Obviously, not everybody will accept it that way, but for most people, if you're approached by somebody with humility, with grace, with respect, most people will engage that.
Yeah.
And it reminds me, what you're saying, Randy, very much of the I don't know what you'd call it, the mix mash of the scripture today was so lovely, so beautiful. We could all dwell on those words. They would become much more a part of us if we're truly seeking after them. Yeah, that was beautiful. I loved it.
When you look at scripture, it's amazing how much it has to say about communication and how much is timeless, just timeless wisdom for conversation.
Yeah.
So we've got a few other interesting comments and questions that have come in here. This one comes from Steve Manukian. He asks, how do you pinpoint and address misunderstandings that surface as a result of cross-cultural communication?
Stephen, good to hear from you, brother. I did a speaking engagement for Stephen Manukian in Ras Al Khaimah, which is about an hour north of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates. It was really quite an amazing experience. Interestingly enough, Philip, I think we have a sermon in this series coming up on cross-cultural communication.
We do.
Is that the one you're preaching? Or is that Joey? I don't remember off the top of my head.
I'm doing a cross-generational.
Oh, okay. So this may be Joey then, but yeah, that's really a good question, because the truth is mere cultural differences can make a profound difference for good or for not so good. Things like whether or not you do speak truth to somebody who's over you in a power relationship. Things about whether or not you can touch somebody. Things about, so many elements of communication can be different in other cultures that the more you're able to know about that culture, the better off you're going to be in trying to communicate to it. Because you can make some well-intentioned, but nevertheless mistakes that can make the conversation much harder just because you violated certain cultural norms at times without even knowing it.
That's the difficult part of, if you don't know that you've crossed over some area where they would expect certain type of reverence or respect or whatever it may be, you're in it. It can be a really, really tough ride from there. And you might need to get somebody to, of course, counsel you to see what you can do to help make those ways right, or bring in another person. The Bible says, bring in another person if you're needing some help to bridge all of that.
Yeah, yeah.
And if you look at the example of the incarnation, Philip, Jesus came and took on our flesh, took on our experience, took on our world and our life. And because of that, we were able to hear so much more of God and who God is, what God desires from us, because in a sense, it's being communicated in our language and our terms. It becomes so much more accessible. It's incarnated in our skin. And I think that's probably the best example of cross-cultural communication that exists, that he entered into our world and became one of us. And because of that, we came to understand and to see God in ways we never would have otherwise.
Good point. Let's go to a few other questions before our time's up here. This one comes from Bill Omar. He asked a little bit ago, should one spouse take relationship issues to others outside the relationship unknowingly?
Now, I'm with that question, understanding all the way up to the unknowingly. Should one spouse take relationship issues?
You're going to ask your neighbor what they think about a marital issue you're having. Is that how I'm reading it? I don't know, maybe.
Well, I would say just a couple of things to start it off, just generally. I would be really cautious about what you take outside of the relationship, and even more cautious about who you take it to. Take, for example, something that happens with some frequency, I suspect, with younger marrieds, and that is taking something to mom or dad that they're dealing with in their relationship. Now, on the one hand, you're very thankful that you have a relationship with your mom or dad that you can trust and that you can communicate, and I think that's a real value. On the other hand, the person in the marriage will find it likely easier to forgive and move on than will the parent. And that can create some ongoing challenges, and it creates some triangles that are not necessarily the most beneficial. And I think it's for that reason that you have people like, say, for example, Jamie, who's in a therapy practice. I think that's a much, much better setting to sit down and to talk something through. You have an objective person that has training in this area. And Jamie's interest is going to be to help improve the communication and get that relationship onto firmer ground. So I think there are times when you do need to probably take something outside of just the relationship to get help. I'd be very thoughtful about doing that and extremely careful about who you do it with. That's just my take.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Randy. I would say that unless there is something unsafe going on for your own safety, that your partner does need to know that you'd like to talk to someone about whatever might be going on. Like I said, unless you are concerned for your safety. But you're really breaking down those walls of trust and communication that you've hopefully spent a good while building up. And so if you just go and tell everyone or tell somebody that the person did not want them to know, or whatever it may be, you definitely need to communicate. And if you can't communicate to your partner that you want to talk to someone, then you probably both need to go talk to someone together. Start to work on your communication.
Yeah,
absolutely. Tell us now, both of you, just we're going to answer two more questions here. What do you do when one party plays the I am righteous card and always right? How do you converse with such a person?
Ooh.
I have to tell you, I've been reading this, Philip, you may remember these books. Been reading a 6-volume biography on the life of a woman named Ellen White, which is a name that's very, very well known in Adventism, might not be as well known outside of Adventism. But it's interesting. I came to a portion there where it was talking about Ellen and James, husband and wife, and where he had gotten really upset with her. And he wrote her a letter and he said, get your head off of my shoulders. I have one that works just fine. And I thought, wow, imagine being married to somebody who has some significant insight and is telling you things. Well, James didn't take too well to that at certain points. So, yeah, that would be interesting. Nobody likes to be, let me think of a different and a kinder way to say this. It's hard to be around somebody who's always right, or who kind of plays the I'm righteous card. That's tough to be. And I think in a time when feelings are not intense or you're not having a disagreement, to sit down and talk about that and just express, this is a challenge for me. I love it when I see the more tender, vulnerable side of you. The other night when you said, I'm sorry, I did such and so wrong, that really touched me. It made me feel a more human connection to you. And trying to get to that place where you get beyond and beneath that exterior of always being righteous, I think would be really important.
Yeah.
I also just kind of think about one last question that wouldn't be a bad one to kind of look at, and that is this person who really kind of flipped the question that was asked previously, and it is, how do you deal with kind of know-it-all adult parents talking to a young adult?
So this is flipping that one around?
Yeah, flipping the question that was asked previously, how do you deal with know-it-all young adults? And the other side is, how do you deal with then know-it-all parents?
Ah, okay, I got you. So this is going both ways. So Jamie, how do you deal with know-it-all parents?
Well, and this one, Julie Bear said older parents too. So it could be an adult, adult child and their more elder parents.
Yes.
Ooh, that is a really rough question. I mean, obviously you would hope that you could have the opportunity to engage with them and that they could be humble enough to hear you. And, sometimes if they are open enough, that you would take them certain aspects of different tools that you might be able to use and say, hey, I want to have this conversation with you. Could we use this format and just see how that goes? It might be really difficult for that to happen between child and parent as adults. So you might have to have somebody else come in and help have that conversation or give some communication training. And, obviously, if you don't want to go to therapy, maybe you could even find, I know I'm working on another program to offer through Loma Linda, and one of the topics I'm considering is actually communication, which seems potentially ideal with this series that we have going on. So would that person be willing to join you in some sort of seminar or, something like that? And then, of course, pray for that person that the Lord would soften their heart and, really the Holy Spirit would speak to them, because you can't change their heart and they can't necessarily change their heart, but God can.
Yeah, that's very true. I would throw one other piece out, Philip, and that is that I suspect that if you're getting into something with somebody who has kind of a know-it-all attitude, it's going to be easy to end up in an argument. And now I'll tell you my take. I'm not saying this is anybody else's take, but I've almost come to the conclusion that in a personal relationship, parent, child, siblings, husband, wife, etc., argument is never productive. I've pretty much come to that because argument has its place in the world. We need political argument. We need two candidates to stand on the stage and argue their side as we're working out who we're going to vote for. We need argument in the courtroom. So the defense attorney and the prosecutor, they go after an argument, and then we make a decision. So argument has its place. But in a personal relationship, I just think it so quickly and easily ends up being damaging. And I've almost come to the place of saying, while argument is damaging, conflict does have a purpose. Now, they sometimes can sound like each other and they sometimes can feel like each other, but I would distinguish them personally by the goal of each. The goal of an argument is to win. You want to win this election. You want to win this case. You want to win this exchange with your spouse, whatever it is. The goal is to win. The goal of conflict, on the other hand, is to understand and to be understood. And so if my goal is not to win, not to beat this person, but to understand them and to help them understand me, I think it's going to be much more productive. And with a person who maybe has a know-it-all attitude, maybe trying to come at them with that key thought in mind. I want to understand them better, and I want them to understand me better, can maybe help sort out some of the choices about how to communicate along the way.
That's a great one.
Yeah, and just to kind of piggyback on that with some kind of additional practical ideas, first and foremost, go to the person without an explicit agenda. I'm going to make this person understand or believe X, Y, Z. And perhaps with this kind of person, starting out with questions in which you are seeking their, wisdom, and essentially showing a type of honor to them. Because I imagine that this person could actually be very sensitive in terms of their ego, and that they're always right. And so if you feed in on that a little bit, it might actually soften them.
Yeah. I mean, I think of the older generation that's in front of myself has a lot to offer, and they feel like they still have so much to give and don't have an outlet. And sometimes their children are that outlet, And so I think definitely having a space of grace to listen them out a little bit, like you're saying, Jamie, giving them that opportunity. And then the other thing, though, is I wonder if honest conversations of just, hey, Mom, Dad, I don't think you actually really listen very much to my life and my heart and my ideas. I feel as though it's really a one-way conversation. I know you have a lot to give. I know you have so much good to share, and I want to be part of that. But I also want to have input into this experience together.
Oh, absolutely. There is definitely a place for truth telling, Philip, just like you're saying. I mean, Ephesians 4:15, which in that specific context is probably addressing more doctrinal issues, but can also apply to relational issues, where Paul says, speak the truth, but do it in love.
Yeah,
I think there's absolutely a place for that. One statement we ought to, before we finish, we ought to look at is the one by Dave Werner. He made it earlier, back about 2:27 p.m. Dave is an attorney in our congregation, and he said something that I think we should not miss that underlines the key importance of communication. So he says, lack of communication has been very, very good to me in that it paid for my 3 children's education. When dealing with people who can't trust anything the other says, I often seek for someone to take a positive action to get off high center. Talk is cheap. Actions are what make the difference. I just think about that. Here's an attorney who says, when you can't communicate, that's actually been very good to me. It's paid for my kids' education. That's how important communication is. To be able to communicate so that I can understand another person's thinking process as well as their feelings, their heart, what's going on within them. It's the Christian marriage and family therapy couple, Les and Leslie Parrott, who talk about how extremely important it is to feel empathy in your marriage, empathy for your spouse. And I think that's probably goes across all kinds of relationships, collegial relationships, sibling relationships, etc. To feel empathy for them by putting yourself in their shoes, in their situation, by viewing the world from their perspective. And then I think you start to understand what people are trying to say to you. I ran across a question in, of all places, that bastion of deep research, the Reader's Digest, years ago, that I've never forgotten. I mean, I was probably a teenager when I read this, but it has stayed with me all these years. It said one of the best questions you can ask if you want to enter into your spouse's experience and feel empathy for them is ask this question: what would it be like to be married to me? What would it be like to be married to me? Most people run screaming from the room about that point. So, but it's a good question to ask, to get into that space of empathy. And empathy then opens you up to be able to more fully understand the other person, it seems to me.
Yeah. Well, both of you, thank you so much. I think our viewers were really blessed by your comments, your insights over all these years of just your counseling practices and education. Thank you, Randy. Thank you, Jamie, so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Philip, and thank you, Jamie.
Yes, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, blessings to all of you, those of you who've been watching. If this was touching to you, if you would just consider potentially sharing this, as it's going to be uploaded on our YouTube page, and bless someone else who might be wondering about some of these communication issues. We'll see you next Sabbath, the same time, same place. Bye-bye.